I was on my knees, scrubbing an old coffee stain from Grandpa Walter's kitchen tile, when my phone vibrated across the counter. Mom had texted me. "We're off to Cancún, took care of the house." I stopped scrubbing. 6 weeks. Grandpa had been gone for exactly 6 weeks, and somehow my parents had already decided the house he'd spent 40 years paying for was theirs to take care of. I called Mom immediately. She answered over airport noise. "Jenette, we're boarding soon." "What did you do with Grandpa's house?" A pause. Then she actually laughed. "Your father handled everything." My stomach tightened. 3 days earlier, Dad had stood in the same kitchen and told me, asterisk, that property could solve problems for all of us. I told him Grandpa wanted me handling the house while everything was settled. Apparently, that answer hadn't mattered. "Mom, what does handled everything mean?" "Don't make this difficult," she said. "Your father knows what he's doing." Then I looked through Grandpa's front window. A man was standing on the lawn with a professional camera. He raised it toward the house and took another photograph. I lowered the phone. "Mom, why is there a real estate photographer outside?" This time, she didn't answer immediately. And suddenly, I understood. They hadn't waited for me to agree. They'd waited for me to be busy. For the last 2 years of Grandpa's life, I had been the one bringing groceries, fixing things around the house, and making sure he could stay in the place he loved. Mom and Dad mostly treated my attachment to it as foolishness. Sentimental nonsense, Dad called it. Now Grandpa was gone, and apparently they believed my habit of avoiding family fights meant I would eventually surrender. Mom finally said, "There's been interest in the property. Your father found an opportunity. By the time we get back, we can discuss how everything gets divided." Divided? "Jenette, please, we're going on vacation. Don't turn this into drama." I stood and walked toward Grandpa's old filing cabinet. Good thing I flagged it last week. "What?" Dad had asked me 7 days earlier, where Grandpa kept his deed. He tried to make it sound casual. It was. Something about the question bothered me enough that I contacted the county recorder and requested an alert if anyone tried filing anything involving Grandpa's property. Mom's voice sharpened. "What exactly did you flag?" "The house." Airport announcements sounded behind her. "Cancel whatever you did," she said. "No." That single word felt strange, coming out of my mouth. Mom went silent. Then she said, "Your father will deal with this when we land." She hung up. Outside, the photographer continued working, but I wasn't watching him anymore. My phone was ringing again. The name on the screen made me straighten. Elaine Porter, Grandpa's longtime notary. I answered. "Elaine." She skipped hello entirely. "Jenette, I need you to listen carefully." I gripped the edge of Grandpa's counter. "What happened?" Her next question turned Mom's strange text into something much worse. "Did your father tell you what he filed this morning?" Elaine's question stayed in my head. "What do you mean, what he filed?" "I don't want to explain this over the phone," she said. "Come to my office, and Jenette, bring anything Walter kept regarding the house." My eyes moved toward Grandpa's filing cabinet. "Elaine, did my father try to sell it?" Another pause. "Come see me." She hung up. I opened Grandpa's cabinet before I even grabbed my purse. Most folders were exactly where he'd always kept them: taxes, insurance, repairs. Then, behind an old utility folder, I found a cream envelope with Dad's name written across the front. Inside were copies of letters from 8 months earlier. Dad had been pressuring Grandpa to sell. One message mentioned maintenance costs. Another argued Grandpa was sitting on money the family could use. Then I found Grandpa's handwriting in the margin of one page. "Robert thinks being my son gives him authority over what I built." I sat back on my heels. Suddenly, little things from the last year looked different. I remembered bringing Grandpa groceries, while he complained that Dad had called 3 times asking about property values. I remembered driving him to appointments, replacing the broken kitchen faucet, and helping him organize bills while Mom and Dad somehow appeared whenever money or inheritance entered the conversation. And then I remembered something Grandpa had asked me 3 months before he died. We had been sitting at this kitchen table. He looked at me and said, "If somebody tells you this house belongs to the family, what will you say?" I'd laughed. "I'll tell them it belongs to you." He'd smiled. At the time, I thought he was being sentimental. Now I wasn't so sure. My phone rang again. "Dad." "Jenette," he said pleasantly, "your mother says you're upset." I spoke to Elaine. His tone changed instantly. "You did what?" "I spoke to Grandpa's notary." "Stop calling people." I stared at Grandpa's handwritten note. "Why?" "Because this is bigger than you understand. Don't contact the county, Elaine, an attorney, anybody. We'll straighten this out when your mother and I return." "You're already leaving the country." "That's irrelevant." "No, Dad, it seems pretty convenient." His voice hardened. "Do not interfere with that property transaction." There it was. Not a discussion. A transaction. I stood and walked toward the window. I think that's why Grandpa made sure I would understand. Dad went completely silent. Then the call ended. Outside, the photographer suddenly lowered his camera and began packing his equipment. For half a second, I wondered if my alert had already stopped something. Then a dark sedan pulled into Grandpa's driveway. A man stepped out carrying a thick folder. He introduced himself as a representative from the title company and asked whether we could speak. "What is this about?" He opened the folder. Then he pulled out a document and turned it toward me. I recognized the signature immediately. "Robert Carter. My father." The man looked from the document to me. "Ms. Carter, are you aware that your father is claiming legal authority over this property?" "Legal authority?" I stared at Dad's signature until Elaine arrived and joined us inside Grandpa's living room. The real estate agent came in behind her, looking considerably less confident than the photographer had 20 minutes earlier. The title representative placed the documents on Grandpa's coffee table. "This is what was presented to support Mr. Carter's authority." Elaine picked up the first page. Her expression changed immediately. "Power of attorney." I looked at her. Grandpa gave Dad power of attorney. "Years ago," she said, "during a hospitalization." The real estate agent leaned forward. Mr. Carter represented that he had authority to handle the property. My stomach dropped. So this wasn't just a conversation about selling someday. Nobody answered immediately. I pointed toward the documents. He already started the transaction. The agent slowly nodded. That was the moment everything changed. My parents hadn't gone to Cancún hopping. I'd eventually agree. Dad had already presented paperwork claiming he could act for Grandpa and move the house toward a sale. Elaine turned another page. "There's a serious problem here." "What?" She tapped the document. "This should never have been presented as current authority." The title representative immediately gathered several pages. "Until we establish exactly who has authority over this property, nothing proceeds." The agent shifted in his chair. "I was told this was a straightforward family transaction." "It isn't," I said. "My grandfather is dead, and I never authorized this house to be sold." My phone began vibrating. "Mom." I declined it. She called again. Then Dad. Then Mom again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Jenette," Mom said, her voice suddenly softer. "Whatever those people are telling you, don't embarrass us in front of strangers." I looked around Grandpa's living room. Not one word about what Dad had done. Not one question about whether the documents were legitimate. Just embarrassment. You're worried about strangers. Your father was trying to help this family. The title representative stood. I'm suspending the transaction pending review. The agent, immediately, began collecting his listing materials. Mom heard him through the phone. What did he say? I ended the call. For the first time, Dad's plan was moving backward. But Elaine hadn't finished. She placed a sealed folder on Grandpa's kitchen table. Walter left this with me. I stared at it. Why? Because your grandfather believed Robert might try exactly this. Before she could open it, the title representative's phone rang. He answered. Hello. His expression tightened. Yes, I'm at the property now. We all waited. Then he slowly lowered the phone and looked directly at me. The county found a second filing. A second filing. The title representative nodded, still holding his phone. Submitted this morning. Elaine's eyes narrowed. By Robert. Yes. My stomach tightened. What did my father file? He attempted to establish control over the property before the transaction moved forward. The county flagged it during review. Suddenly, the alert I'd requested made sense. Dad asking where Grandpa kept his deed. Mom's message, ***, took care of the house. The photographer. The rushed transaction. And their convenient flight to Cancún. They planned this for today, I said. Elaine looked at me. They expected you to find out afterward. While I was at work, my parents had tried to create enough momentum that by the time I understood what was happening, I'd be arguing against a transaction already underway. But they had made one mistake. They assumed Grandpa had left everything exactly as they remembered it. Elaine rested her hand on the sealed folder. Walter came to see me months before he died. About Dad. Specifically about Robert's old authority. I looked down at the folder. What did Grandpa do? I'll show you, but first, understand something. Your father did not know everything Walter put in place. The title representative closed his folder. Until ownership and authority are fully verified, this transaction is frozen. My phone rang again. Dad. This time, the call displayed as international. They had landed in Cancún. I answered. Jenette, listen to me, Dad said. The commanding confidence from earlier was gone. Tell Elaine to stop. I glanced at her. Stop what? Whatever she's doing with Walter's documents. But you told me everything you did was legitimate. Silence. So why are you worried about Grandpa's paperwork? Jenette. Why? His breathing came through the phone. Then he said quietly, whatever Walter left with that woman, you do not let her file it. I looked at Elaine. She turned the sealed folder toward me. Written across the front, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were the words. For Jenette, if Robert tries to take the house. Dad was still talking through the phone, but I barely heard him. Elaine slid one finger beneath the seal and broke it open. Then she looked directly at me. Your grandfather was waiting for this day. Elaine removed several documents from Grandpa's envelope and laid them across the kitchen table. Your father made one major assumption, she said. He believed Walter never changed the authority he gave him years ago. She pushed the first document toward me. It was dated months before Grandpa died. Across the top were the words *revocation of power of attorney. I looked at Elaine. Grandpa revoked Dad's authority. Formally. She showed me the signatures and dates. After Dad began repeatedly pressuring Grandpa to sell the house, Grandpa had gone to Elaine and revoked the old power of attorney Robert was now relying on. But that wasn't all Grandpa had done. Elaine placed another recorded document beside it. Walter completed a transfer on death deed, nomming you as beneficiary. I stared at my name. Jenette Carter. Grandpa hadn't left ownership vague. He had taken steps while mentally competent and independently represented to make his intentions clear. "That's why you called me first." Elaine nodded. "Walter instructed me to contact you immediately if anyone attempted to file conflicting documents involving this property. Dad thought he had found an old piece of paper that gave him control. Grandpa had already made sure it didn't. And the property alert I requested after Dad started asking about the deed had exposed the attempt before the transaction could get any further." Elaine reached back into the envelope. "There's something else." It was a letter. This time, Grandpa had written my name across the top. I sat at his kitchen table and unfolded it. He explained that the house wasn't payment for taking care of him. He didn't want me believing I had earned an inheritance by bringing groceries, driving him to appointments, or fixing things around the house. He had chosen me because I was the person who treated the house as his *** home, instead of money waiting to be divided. I stopped reading for a moment. The kitchen was silent. My hand tightened around the paper as I looked at the tile I had been scrubbing when Mom texted me. Grandpa knew. He had known exactly what Dad might try. And instead of leaving me to fight about his intentions after he was gone, he had put them in writing. The consequences came quickly. The title company terminated the attempted transaction. The prospective buyer walked away. Dad's filing couldn't override Grandpa's recorded documents, and the real estate agent refused to continue dealing with him over the property. I kept copies of everything and followed the proper legal process to secure the title in my name. Then I called a locksmith. Mom and Dad still had keys. By that evening, they didn't. The story they had been telling relatives fell apart too. Apparently, Mom had been telling people I was refusing to share Grandpa's inheritance. Once the actual documents became known, there was nothing left to argue about. Grandpa had made the decision himself. Days later, Mom and Dad returned from Cancún. They didn't call first. I saw their car pull into Grandpa's driveway from the kitchen window. Dad marched straight toward the porch. Mom followed him. He shoved his key into the front door lock. It wouldn't turn. He tried again. Then harder. I opened the door from inside, but stayed in the doorway. Dad stared at me. "You changed the locks." "On my house, yes." His jaw tightened. "Jenette, move." "No." Mom stepped forward. "Your grandfather would never shut his own son out of this house." I already had the documents ready. I handed Dad copies of Grandpa's revocation and the recorded property paperwork. "Then you should read what Grandpa decided himself." Dad looked down. His eyes moved across the first page, then stopped at the date. He checked it again. That was the moment his anger disappeared. Grandpa had revoked his authority months before Dad tried using it. Mom leaned over his shoulder. "What does it say?" Dad didn't answer. He just kept staring at Grandpa's signature. There was nothing left for them to pressure me into signing. No sale waiting to close. No authority Dad could wave in my face. And no key that opened the front door anymore. I didn't invite them inside. My relationship with my parents became distant after that. They stopped receiving information about my finances, property, or legal affairs. They received no spare keys and no authority to make decisions for me. I kept Grandpa's house. I repaired it slowly, room by room, without anyone standing over me calculating what each improvement might add to the selling price. And I never completely removed that coffee stain from the kitchen tile. There's still a faint mark if the light hits it correctly. Grandpa used to joke that it would outlive him. He was right. My parents went to Cancún believing Grandpa's house would be theirs when they came home. Instead, they came home to changed locks, a dead sale, and Grandpa's signature proving he had seen them coming months before they ever made their move.